Right, so welcome everybody to CHCMHS002, Session 3. I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country to start us off. In the spirit of reconciliation, Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nations people and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. Just remember, with our housekeeping, we have cameras on and mics off during delivery. Making sure that we are looking after ourselves. Remember that weekly, it's really good to nourish ourselves and our minds. Remembering respectful language and leaving our biases aside, as is our duty of care. Also, too, just remember that some of the content might have what we class as a trigger warning. And if there's any emotional dysregulation, please reach out. And these are the numbers that you can use. We have the mental health line, 13-YARN for our First Nations people, Lifeline 131114. And we also have the Beyond Blue app if you would like to use that. All right, Session 3. Let's have a look. So the collaborative relationship, reflective practice and programs, services and support. I think the biggest part here is that collaboration and that practice that you put into play for yourself as well as viewing your role as well, your practices, your skills, really crucial for the role in mental health, because that is also going to give you a basis of how to build your framework on, as well as where you need to manage yourself for self-care as well, and can identify some things like that. So, talking about self-advocacy tonight. And when we're working with clients with mental illness, it is important to be an advocate. This means that you speak up and represent their needs, goals, and interests. Now, when we say representing, we're looking at being a voice so they can be heard. We're not taking over their practices, their wants, their goals, where they're going. We just want to help guide them. But helping somebody to be enabled to speak up is around that, helping build their self-agency as well in this. Agency to be able to lead their recovery. So self-advocacy. It allows the individual to participate more fully. And when you think about it, it's about when we can help somebody express their goals and they can make choices from resources that we give, and we can then identify their needs more clearly, and they also could be more ready and willing because they've been a part of that process. This is really important for that person-centered practice to be here in play with coming from us as the worker, and creating that safe space so they feel, individuals feel strong enough to be able to be a part of their own direction and feeling willing and ready to do these things. So it's about that space we create for them to do that in as well. So let's just have a look at this short video on self-advocacy. Just going to press pause. So what would you say your takeaway from that would be? What was one thing that stood out to you that you didn't know before? I think for myself, it was around that right to have a second opinion, even though we can think about it, we don't often do it, but we do have the right to do that and to seek. There's something in you that tells you that that's not quite sitting right for you. So you can have that right to seek out for more information before you make a decision. Sarah?
My kids used to be engaged with CHCMHS. I don't know whether it's a child, youth, and mental health service. And it was before my eldest son was diagnosed with ASD, and like his teachers and what I knew about ASD, he's the most typical ASD kid going. And they wouldn't diagnose him. So I went down to Minds and Hearts in Brisbane, which is the Tony Atwood one clinic, and they diagnosed him. And I went back to Kim's and they kicked us out the service because they didn't like the fact that I'd got a second opinion.
It's hard, but overall, because some services don't talk to the others, so to speak, in the industry, but the aim here is to have a diagnosis to be able to then implement things to support the person, isn't it? And I think that's what people come up against is that difficulty with going over or speaking over, but you're not speaking over, you're just getting more information. And you had to advocate for what you needed, Sarah. You knew something was else there. You knew you needed to have the information. So you did find it. So you used your advocacy skills. It's just interesting that, and it does happen throughout the industry, that some services do not speak to other services, so to speak. And I'm really not sure why, because it should be all about the individual and their health.
They are apparently renowned for it, and Cooper was also seeing them, and they said they were going to do this, this, and this with him, and they kicked me out with him too. Or because they told me to get a second opinion, and I did, and they didn't like what that second opinion said.
Then it's about, also too, from that, you could take it that then you have to find the right fit for your, support and
Yeah.
therapies. And
Yeah.
you would then can guide that more that way too, because it sort of pushes you to do that in a sense, if that's the response. And then you would, I imagine, gather more information and understanding along the way that you become more knowledgeable in knowing how to um, and what resources to and how to get those resources. So think about the skills that you learnt along the way with that as well. Even though challenging, sometimes
I
that's what we have to
managed,
do for our,
yeah,
the people we work for too.
I managed to then get, because he was diagnosed, I could get NDIS. So then I could afford to take him to private psychologists and OT and
Yeah. So a win-win
yeah.
in a sense that jumping over the hurdles that you might have first come up against through your strength and advocacy. Look where it took you.
The highly amusing thing is, sorry.
You're right. I'm just thinking about where that whole journey, you're thinking about that they said get a second opinion and you did, and it wasn't well received, that you were then able to then action so many other things as well.
Yeah. The highly amusing thing is though that his dad doesn't believe even to this day, doesn't believe he's got ASD. And I apparently paid the psychologist and the OT to write reports to diagnose him. He's just doesn't understand. And he also thinks that the NDIS money is paid to me, so I'm getting extra money. He's just insane.
With all things come challenges, isn't there, in all we do?
Yeah.
I think the main thing is, you know the truth, Sarah, and you're the one putting in things in place for your child. So that's what you take away from that. Could I ask, what does advocate mean in terms of working with a client with mental illness?
You speak
What
up for
does that
them on
mean?
their behalf.
In what sense? When you say on their behalf, is that with their knowledge, or is that trying to speak for them, or what?
No, you talk to them and arrange what they want to do um, by using the person-centered care and develop a plan between you first, and then you speak up on their behalf on what they've decided.
Yeah, perfect. You'll be able to answer your questions in your assessment. All right. So advocacy and self-advocacy, you also need to have effective communication, because being able to tell somebody what your needs and goals are, you have a clear idea and understanding of what you need, as well as being able to do that in a safe space and having the confidence to keep moving forward on that as well. That's really important to do. And it's often where people fall down in trying to advocate for themselves, in that the ability to do that feels like it's out of reach. And it also has to do with the environment you're in when you're trying to advocate. So is that affecting you being able to speak up, or are you feeling pressured by somebody else? If you're in a safe space, that makes it easier for you to reach out for support to do that. That'll help build your self-confidence in doing that. But the environment, if you're feeling pressured and you feel unsafe, or you're unsure of where you are or how receptive people are as well, that can actually make people stand back and not want to speak. So we're going to have a look at self-advocacy, and we're going to go to the IMA website, and we're going to look at 3 different case scenarios coming from there around self-advocacy. And we're going to look at the actions that you need to take in when you're advocating for somebody, and how will you manage that space for them whilst you're doing that. So we've just heard around building that space, that safe space, helping build up confidence, nice, clear communication, easy instructions to follow will all make a difference. You'll each have a case study to look at. There'll be questions there. And then I would like for you to bring back 2 points of interest, awareness that you had from that exercise, and what you discovered along that way, that process. So let me just stop sharing, and I'm going to show you this I'm a website, because our learners at home can also do this activity. I've got the address here for that. So I'm just going to stop share, and I'm just going to put. So this is the IMO website. I'll just go straight up to the top, and it's about speaking up for your rights. So let's have a look. So this is all about self-advocacy. Know your rights. This is a great resource to have. You can have download resources from this website as well. And it talks about how you have the decision maker right here. How to make complaints. And they have links in here as well. Resources here. Here's all your resources down here. You can go straight to the map. And then we have Farah's story, Emmanuel, and Alex's. And when you come over to these stories, have a look at, it'll open up to the story, and it will actually have questions for you to be able to respond to. Take note of these questions. They're really good skills to have for your toolbox here. Finding out about what resources can assist and what is the main solution here. Don't need to go down to making a plan. And we're not concerned with this part here. I would like you to focus on from step 1 to 3, and you can finish here the main preferred solution. You don't have to go to a preferred one. So I'm going to put that link into the chat now for us. So when you go into the website, Lisa, can I get you to work on Farah's story, please? And could you work with Emmanuel's story? And Sarah, can you work with Alex's story? Have a look at the questions they ask. Can you respond to those? This is what we're looking for. So these questions would be questions that people might ask you when you're advocating for them. So for those at home, have a look at that website, have a look at those questions. It will give you some insight into some of the skills that you would need for self-advocacy. So look at 2 things that you might be able to respond to for this person. Think about even one resource that you might be able to lead them to. And then bring back 2 things that you learned from that process. Okay. Welcome back. How did we go? I just did some researching on the IMA website whilst you were doing your task and found out that they have self-advocacy for NDIS participants and their carers, as well as supported decision-making resources. And they also have what they call a mental health NDIS toolkit. And I've put the information in the chat here. But for those at home, please do go to the website and have a look at what they offer. And it's about a toolkit that has worksheets to know your rights, how to speak up for yourself, how to, when you're applying for the NDIS, it's around being able to ask those questions. And it's about knowing that you can have a look at what suits your needs. And the toolkits they're designed to help you navigate the mental health system. And your carers or family can also do that too. And it actually acknowledges that people use the tool that might have both psychosocial and physical disability. So they're looking at the whole environment of what the person is in and thinking about the advocacy that you would need to meet your social, emotional, and your mental health. So from our group activity, we were looking at the cases of Farah, Emmanuel, and Alex. So who was doing Alex? Sarah? Yep. So what did you find, Sarah? Like, how were the questions? How did you find those?
Yeah, they were, once you read through them, they made sense. Kind of you, why didn't I think of them in the first place? But I suppose didn't realize there was lots of resources there that you can use to help stand up for yourself or get help standing up for you, because often you just feel so intimidated by the industry, I suppose, like by the treating staff, that you feel that you're not informed enough about everything to make your own decisions. They know better, so you just feel as though you need to go along with what they say. And I didn't know about this IMHA advocacy page. I'm assuming it applies, it says Victoria, but I'm assuming it applies everywhere, does it?
Yeah, yeah.
Resources are, you've got the fact sheets, videos, and if you don't understand, call IMHA. But you might not feel confident enough to do that yourself, so you could always get a family member to do it for you. And I learned that it is always important to continue with what you feel you want to do and not be intimidated by stuff, because I've done that before. I know when I've gone through the public system, I just never ever got anywhere in the whole 3 years because no one would listen to me. But I couldn't afford to go private, so you had to just go along, and I didn't know any of this anyway. So, and then yeah, if they don't listen, there are resources there that can help you.
So do you think, knowing where you've been, what you've now learned as a resource, that'll be something that you can share with your future clients? And some of those questions you were saying, like, I didn't know I could ask them. Would that be something you could put into your practice, like the actual questions?
Yeah.
And that could be advocacy around anything, not just NDIS, around anything to do with
Yeah.
mental health. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Angie.
Yeah. For me, I never knew about this information, so it's really, really important. Because I've got my own challenges with my daughter who's got an eating disorder, and she challenges the doctors, and because she's doing, and since she was 12, she was challenging them anyway. And I can't back her up because I don't have the information to back up, and I don't know where to look. So having this is amazing, and from experience, from my personal experience, and reading this information, and I believe in 9 minutes. No offense to you, I know you're doing the class, and that's how it works. But this is information, like, I'm hungry. My soul is hungry for this, to sit there and actually read and absorb this information in my own time, obviously. But yeah, like I think this information is just really going to be helpful in this, especially if we had more time to absorb it. That's how I see it. But I've learned from this, reading it, that reading it and understanding it, and having someone else stand up for your rights is important, because in mental health, in some situations, when they hand your pamphlet at the service,
Yeah,
you're
just breaking up
overwhelmed.
there.
Sorry, you're overwhelmed, and you won't be able to really read it or even understand it. And not everybody could read. So having someone standing up for your rights, or understanding it and explaining it, I think it's really good information to have.
So it's certainly opened up something for you that you can explore further.
Definitely.
For your own skills as well. But it certainly sounds like you will use some of the skills from that, knowledge from that service for yourself as well.
Yes.
For you. Excellent. Love that. And I would have given you longer, but yes, that's right. We nearly do a break. So, Lisa, you were working on which scenario?
Farah story.
How did you find the questions matched to her story?
This website, I'm really glad that you have put us onto. With like her wanting to change her medications and stuff, and having a backup plan and using resources to get what she wants. I've been in similar situations with my children and myself. And I've known about self-advocacy because I've had to use them before, but just having this website available is just so relieving to know that there is information to help me, which that knowledge I can help other people move forward with their recovery.
And match that with lived experience. What is that going to give then? Like you're able to do so much, take away from your understanding from the knowledge, and then being able to then give them another resource, a handout that they can then continue on with advocacy on, as so I think in a sense here, giving them, helping people have self-advocacy is giving them agency to then move forward independently. Would you
Yeah,
agree
it's
with that?
finding, like, being or doing self advocacy for a person also teaches them that they can do it for themselves, but that you, as the professional, can put others in place to be self advocacy for the client.
Yeah, yeah. Family, friend, those, and they can do that journey with them as well.
Yeah.
And especially when you think somebody has sole care of somebody, somebody that might have the care of somebody towards, even when you think about all different ages with major illness and decision-making processes here, not just mental illness, all different types of things, being able to have a voice. And I think that's something we often stay away from in the health system in all different areas. You hear one point of view and you think you've got to follow it. You feel pressured to follow it. And maybe we're inquisitive enough as a society, but I think we're probably getting better at being able to speak out and say, that's, I want another opinion, or I need some more information on this. I need to have more information to make a more informed decision. Even having that dialogue takes time as well.
Yeah, because I've had to self advocate for my eldest son who's in supported living in Bundaberg. And with doing that, I've then also had to get another person to be a self advocate for him as well to continue on with his treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just
Well, I'm
this
glad you've been
website.
able to find a tool
Yeah.
that can help you with these skills. Do some people, so here's a question. So do some people still think that people with mental health illness aren't capable to decide things for themselves? That's an interesting question. So let's put that out there. Would you, in your experiences, think that would still be happening?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because think about the myths we have in society.
And the stigma
For a start.
attached to it as well.
Yeah. And it's a shame that that's still happening. I know we're getting better as a society, but often because the cognitive ability mightn't be there when it's decision-making time, and having somebody speak up for them, I think that process would be good to be slowed down a bit when that person is more able. But sometimes decisions need to be made as well in a certain timeline, so we understand that. But I think overall, that general perception, I would hope it's changing, but I think you're correct in that there's certainly still people think they're not capable.
Do they, if they think you're not capable to make decisions, do they then think you're not capable of taking in people go away? Sorry. Do they then think you wouldn't be capable of understanding the information around the illness or your decisions. Therefore, they don't even give you any options. They just go ahead with anything without.
I'd say with
Yeah.
this
I don't
type
know
of
if you can
question,
understand what I'm trying to say.
yeah, I can see what you're saying, but I'd say it'd be more that you'd have to be there in that scenario.
Yeah.
That would feel awful, I would imagine.
Yeah.
That then somebody's taken all their rights away for decision making.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be case by case. But yes, it's a very good question to pose.
Yeah.
And
Because
it and it'd be
sorry,
sorry.
I was admitted to the psych ward purely for the fact that they wanted to change my medications and wanted to take me off slowly and start with something new. And they literally, I went in, one day I was on one lot of medications, the next day I was put on another, and it was all pretty high doses. And they didn't even discuss it with me. They just did it. And I've since asked my private psychiatrist, and he was like, well, that's probably why you started your seizures again, because of the side effects of everything. But they did not discuss anything with me. They just did it. I had been told that they were going to wean me off, but yeah, it just didn't happen. So I got no choice at all.
And that's very difficult to hear for you, Sarah. And so if in that experience, how would you translate that over into practice?
Well, I suppose it was the psychiatrist I was seeing that did this, but I don't know whether this was a factor. He was really old and he was near retirement. And I think he just didn't know how to deal with me. And so he just said, this is what's going to happen. So, but there were like my caseworkers there. So I feel they should have been my advocates, but they weren't. So I suppose if I'm not caseworker in the future or support worker or whatever, I would make sure that would be advocating for my client instead of just, I don't know whether they thought, oh well, he's a psychiatrist, we have to do what we're told to. I don't know. But I mean, it's impacted my life a lot because for the last 3 years I've been having seizures and yeah. So I'm
So
really
an
angry,
important
but
takeaway, yeah, to help with that speaking up,
yeah.
yeah, and especially around medication as well, isn't it? In
And
crucial in mental.
I didn't know really that I was allowed to do that. And they didn't really give me all the information about what they were going to do. I was literally given my normal medications at the nighttime, and the next morning, there you go to take them. I'm like, okay. And then they kept feeding me. As soon as I felt anxious, they were feeding me PRN drugs and feeding them into me instead of talking to me. And so I left hospital, crashed and burned, and ended up back in there. So, yeah, looking back, I am really angry. But I can't do anything about it, can I? So, yeah, as you said, I've learned from it now. And
Well, you can, yeah, and like you say, put it into your practice for the future.
yeah.
Know that how you will be an advocate to help somebody advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you. Angie?
I think I forgot now, but I was listening and then I got lost somewhere. But there's a couple of movies, not that I'm promoting movies, but I watched one with Nicole Kidman. She won an award for it. I think it's called The Three Generation. I'll go have a look in a minute. It's about mental health in 3 different stages. I don't know if you've heard about it. Once we're on a break, I'll just quickly go and have a look at the name. It's boring as hell, but it's a really good movie because she's a writer and she had and how mental health was seen in an early 1900 and how it's changed throughout time, and how one person have such a big impact on 5 or 6 people in there. So yeah, so I'll put it out there if that's
Yeah.
okay. And 2 of them I watch about mental health, and I noticed Netflix is bringing out quite a lot now about mental health, which is really interesting because people are not aware of it. And then the question before was about can people think for themselves in mental health, depending on the person, depending on the situation, depending at the time. But that doesn't mean they might not be able to think about one thing here, but that doesn't mean they can't think about the other stuff. And people just
Yep.
put them all in one basket and said, you're crazy. And the
Yeah.
movie really explains it. So yeah, once we go on a break, I'll have a look, see if you guys are interested.
Yeah, bring that back and then we'll share it with our other learners as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, great work, everyone. It's 10 past 7. Let's go for a 10-minute break and be back at 20 past. Thank you for your work. Okay. Right. Welcome back, everyone. Let's have a look at programs, services, and support. So with our work as advocates as well, for clients with mental illness, in regards to services and programs and supports, excuse me, having the knowledge of what's available in your district, your local council area is really important for that flow of work that you can do with somebody. So, and if you don't have that information around mental health services, it's a great activity to do with your participant at the same time and research, and that way you're helping with self-advocacy, agency. You're showing them how to research and look for resources, but you're gaining those, doing that work together. And that's giving them the agency to choose as well at the same time. But it's being able to explore, give you more knowledge, more resources for your toolkit, but at the same time, working side by side. And that's one of the important skills here with advocacy, is that it's not taking off and leading it. It's working side by side, helping share knowledge, share agency. But I always found when I did that, when I had to find something, another resource or a referral service, And if the participant was wanting a certain thing and I didn't know about, let's open up the laptop and let's have a look and see what's available. I will also get in contact with my colleagues to ask for other resources as well, but let's have a look and see if we can find things that will suit your needs as well. Opens up opportunity, opens up hope, and it opens up the scope of moving forward. And one thing I want to also bring up here too, we talk about building hope in recovery, but I'd like you to think about it as building hope and scope, because it's hope for moving forward. But what is the scope of that? That scope is an extended forward space that can know no bounds. So the scope of the learning here and how much you put into it and how broadly you might research and give referrals and the scopes of different assistance that you can refer onto or provide from your agency, all build hope. So I like to think of it as hope and scope. So in your work with your participants, excuse me, making sure that we have consent to do referrals. Each organisation will have their own referral process, but it must meet the legislation needs of the organisation as well as the state that you're in. And each state will have their own regulatory body that governs this. And often it's a national body. And that would be doing with the Mental Health Act, privacy, your duty of care, and the information on consent forms can include any of these details here. And often you'll have limitations to that service as well. And there could be a financial situation where a component of it, where a referral might cost to go to a different agency as well. So that's another consideration. Is your participant consenting to a paid service? Is it a government funded service? You must find out that as well, because actually getting referrals done and made also requires us as workers to ensure we understand the cost, if any, the requirements of the service to be able to access that service, the distance that our participant needs to go to get access that service as well. That's all crucial around that too. But don't forget, consent is about informing your participant of their rights and having that before you proceed doing anything. Don't think you can do the referral and then get consent. No, it must be gaining consent. You can talk about the referral process and the resources you might use, but gaining consent to then share is crucial at that step. Because the rights and responsibilities of the workers, the employers, and individuals, it really should be respected here. Everybody has rights in this process. You have the duty of care to help the participant understand their rights. But you as the worker have the right for safety, information sharing in the organisation. And the organisation has a responsibility to ensure that happens for the worker and the participant. For the participant, you as their worker help them understand that they have a right to complain. And if they're not giving, if they're not satisfied with that information, they can actually take that level of complaint higher. Anything that feels discriminatory to them, uncomfortable, they're not wanting to do what they've been asked to do. They want a second opinion. They want to understand more. I want to try something different. You can help your participants do that. That's part of your role here. So let's do a little bit of a brainstorm around what are some of the rights of the participants in regard to receiving health services. So what is their right to confidentiality? What does that mean? So Lisa?
Keeping that information private from everybody, including people who work within your organization. You have to get informed consent from the client first, and unless it's subpoenaed by the courts.
Yes. Yes, and very good point about the organisation, the workers needing access as well. Good point. Angie?
Lisa covered it, but I feel like it's not just the confidentiality as in a lock filing cabinet or on a hard drive or that. I feel it's like if a client come in, the confidentiality of asking private information should not be that loud where everybody could hear. For example, you go to the doctor and they're always asking you, and I get so cross with them every time. Where do you live? What's your phone number? I don't need the whole medical center to know my business.
That's
I feel
true.
yes, and I get cross with them and I fight with them, and then they say I'm rude. My husband does the electrical work there, and they said, "Oh, she's rude." I says, "I'm not rude. Why don't I want everybody to know where I live?" And I've been living in the same house for 20 something years. It hasn't changed. So isn't that a good point? Is sorry, isn't that a good point? We're not just the way we speak and should be in a quiet way and a respectful way as well.
Yes, yes, exactly. I love that point. That quiet and respectful place that you're gaining that information from your participant. And I know in a front desk type situation around, yeah, like, let's just say per se in the medical center, that front desk position, sorry, that they have to blurt that out and ask, but there could be way. I've seen somebody actually say, so has anything changed from your recent or current address changed? Are there any differences? And if they've got to ask about the phone number, just the last three numbers. And it's or ending in 25. It's not giving much else away. Just to clarify that they've got, because they would have people coming in with all different cognitive ability. But if they're saying yes, or does your Medicare card end with 21? That sort of thing. So then they're gaining confirmation, but you haven't given anything away. That's a very good point to make, because gaining information of people that come in to access a service. Usually you would be going into a quiet place to talk, but often if there's no place to talk, where do you go to do that and do that safely? And I think it's up to us as a worker to find that spot, be able to be quiet, because once you're working as a case manager, there's crucial information you need to have, let alone the person's story, the details of that people would want to keep confidential. They mightn't be used to telling their story. So yeah,
So
really good
someone
point.
from a mental health point of view might like coming out from a normal environment, going into a mental health situation. Some cultures don't even understand or agree about mental health because it's a pride thing. And I'm talking from experience and going through my fair share of it. And someone is blobbing away their mouth about it. Do you think that's going to make me feel safe in that environment? No. So, yeah, when you're first initially collecting information, so important to do it quietly, respectfully. That's how I see it.
Yep. And I think it goes with when you're telling somebody about their right to appeal or to access relevant information. Excuse me, because we're looking at wanting to have all participants feel that they're treated equal. But if we're not doing that as our service as part of our practice, and we're not respecting dignity and right to choice by not doing it in a confidential way, we're not really meeting the needs, meeting the confidentiality platform of privacy and confidentiality. So, Angie, I think it's a good point where you say what you talked about in asking those questions. That's to do with privacy and confidentiality, the way it's managed and the way it's secured there as well. Good points. There is a video there for everybody to have a look about the responsibility and accountability at work for you to look in your own time. So let's have a look at accountability. What are we accountable for when we're working with our participants? How do we meet those needs? So when we're working with our participants who have mental illness, it's important to be ensuring that you're following all your organizational procedures, which makes you accountable. Organizations are accountable to their funding bodies. They must meet the service KPIs in a sense that they would be looking for that money to have reached the goal and hit the mark on what it was going to achieve. And in the government sector, they're accountable for that money being delivered to the community. They're accountable for making sure that that happens for that community. So when you're working in these funding bodies that have funding coming for certain groups and supports, you as a worker would have to follow the legislation and the service provision and ensuring that anti-discrimination does not happen. So there's nobody discriminated against to access that service, that funding, that group, whatever that money is there for. But it's also around the accountability of the organisation for the financial management of that. And this is where agreements have to be in a place, financial agreements, clear agreements with the funding body and the committee that's distributing the funding. And if you're doing that, you're actually then looking at making accountable processes here. So each step is a process that would be documented, so you could then meet the government, the funding body's requirements around accountability. But accountability doesn't just stop with the organisation. It comes into our hands. And then what we do with those processes, with the groups that we do, are we helping our groups meet their and achieve their goals? Our participants, single individual service, are we helping them reach their goals? Because that funding that the organisation gets in often pays for wages and other support systems to ensure that our participants are meeting their needs. So ethical and legislation requirements are covered in our work roles. We have boundaries. We have specifics of an agreement that we would have. We would be working towards different goals and strategies for A, the organisation, B, the participants, and C, the community. It's a process that we all must adhere to, part of our duty of care and part of our work agreement, that we would be working towards the ethos of that organisation, morals and values that they often put up. We also, with our accountability, have to ensure records management. And our documentation is crucial, that we follow policies and procedures. Once again, we hear lots about policies and procedures. These are to ensure that the processes are followed. You are covered as a worker by insurances through the organisation, as long as you follow these policies and procedures. How do you document and handle information correctly for the organisation? Are you following their communication strategies and skills that they would have a policy on? Are you reporting by their guidelines for reporting? Because failure to do so can put somebody at risk, and that will be our participant. The other person that gets put at risk is yourself as a worker and the organisation. So when you're working with participants, making sure that you are documenting everything that you're doing, service supplied, supports, suggestion, referrals. When you're doing that reporting, your supervisor can see that you're meeting the standard that's required in the organisation. You're being accountable for your actions here by doing that. Remember, accountability is the key to all of our work. Plus, when you do that and have a good process of doing that, you can look back over the history of the client and you can have a look and see what worked and what didn't. Did that participant achieve their goals? Was the service not suited to them? Did they need more referrals? Were they not committed to the process? All these things can come out in the evaluation, but if you document everything, you've got a whole evaluation there in front of you. You've got a whole long story. and you can monitor that. You can reevaluate. You can make that plan go further. But anybody else can come in and also work side by side, or even have to work with that participant themselves if you're not there. If you've got good documentation, you're showing accountability, you're showing accountability for your actions, you're showing accountability to the participant as well. Even when you can document down to the point where discussed clients' rights, advocacy, choices, how confidentiality is held in the organization. Document and part of our work in the organizations, our work out in the field is around reflective practice. Reflective practice is important to ensure that we are building our own continuous development. We actually you can actually have external supervision, and that is with somebody who actually looks at your work processes, things that you put in place, your skills, how you're relating that to theory, to the organization, what challenges you have, what things work for you, looking at any negatives and positives, drawing out skills that you haven't identified. And you can do this with colleagues, you can do this with your supervisor as well. And often you might have one-on-ones with your supervisor once a week. And you can then do a reflection on that. And also in organizations, they often offer a mentor or a coach. They're very good opportunities to take up, especially if you're buddied with a colleague in a similar sector. Your duty, your part of your role in all this is around staying up to date with legislative happening in the industry. Lisa?
Sorry, you mentioned like reflecting with a supervisor or a mentor or something like that. Do you or do you not do it with a colleague?
It'd have to be a trusted colleague. And one that you felt that you could ask that question for feedback for a start.
Mhm.
Say you were co-facilitating a group together, and when that group finishes, you always do a debrief, how that went, how it went. You could actually then reflect on, do you feel that my practices were in line with our goals for the group? But that's it in a trusting relationship as well.
What about
I
if
don't think I'd ask
what about if it's just a colleague that you're not doing a supportive role with, like it's just a colleague, but from a different case?
then that would be hard for them to know what your skill set's like
Yeah.
as well. So I think in that level, if you want to go there, you're better off going to your supervisor or external supervision,
Okay.
because then you're getting a perspective of somebody completely different away from the organization. as external supervision. You might have somebody who does supervision in an organization. I think your colleagues are good to bounce ideas off and do debriefing with
Mm,
when something happens, and be able to debrief. And unless you're working side by side with them, they won't know what you're doing. So if you don't really know them, probably not in the right sense to do that. I would see
yeah,
more that
because
an organization, your supervisor to do that.
yeah, okay, because like you'd probably break some form of privacy and confidentiality, wouldn't you? Like, because you'd have to explain scenarios to a minimum extent and stuff like that.
Yeah. So just say you had an issue with another colleague and you went to a different colleague about it. You're
Yeah.
putting them in a space that makes them quite awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you went straight to your supervisor who's managing all these people, that's
Yeah.
part of their job.
Okay.
But certainly debrief if there's been an incident or something's happened and you need to have an ear, a debrief, a difficult participant, and that person said, hey, how you going? You look concerned, and just say, yes, I just worked with somebody that was quite difficult. And if they said, well, do you want to just sit down and have a quick chat? That would be a good instance. But if it was anything to do with reporting something or needing changes or advice to your supervisor,
Okay. Thank you.
it's all right. I certainly found my colleagues good for incidents that happened on site, and if my manager wasn't there and something had happened and other people knew about it, and we would do a debrief. What happened for you? How did that, what were you feeling when that happened, when you did this? Do you think your actions actually improved the situation or made it worse? Or just to be able to get it out. So we're talking critical incidences here that might come in. Somebody could be very aggressive, or you've just done a whole lot of work on your own and you're feeling quite stressed and loaded up with a colleague you trust, of course. So here's some questions that could be useful for you in reflecting upon a situation where you can ask yourself what happened during the interaction. And you can describe that interaction. Asking yourself, could my biases been influencing my decision or my actions here? And that's a tough one because we often don't think we work with bias, but something might inform us of our actions from previous knowledge. So it's one to really take your time and think about. Often when we say, what could I have done better? It needs to be said to yourself in a way that's not saying you did something wrong. This question could be, so what could I have done better? well, actually, I really feel like I met the standard of service. I did everything possible I could at that time. Whether it has a positive or negative outcome for the participant, I know that I fulfilled my duty, I followed my duty of care, I accessed resources. So it doesn't have to be a negative here, but it's the way you ask yourself that. Because it has a bit of a connotation that you've done something not so great. So please look at it on the other side as well. Did I meet the legal and ethical requirements during the interaction? You will notice in all your role plays, we are asking you to think of your legal and ethical considerations before you step in and do the work as a case manager, counselor, whatever role you're playing. That is because that is required out in the field. Have you explained your duty of care? Have you explained mandatory reporting? Have you explained consent and right to privacy and right to service? And these are a legal requirement in the industry. Another question you can ask yourself is, where can I go to learn more about improving my knowledge or approach? Think about evidence-based practice. Is there somebody who's been working for quite a while that you might admire their work? Ask them about resources that they use. Linking in for extra training, PD. The biggest question I find to ask yourself is, did I show empathy and understanding of the complex nature of the person's responses? Often when we're working with people, they come with many issues that layer upon layer, and they build up a complexity because one thing will offset and agitate something else, and it's like a domino effect. The environment that they're living in, think about that biopsychosocial wheel around your environment, the person's genetics, health, wealth, friends, relationships, systems that are around them. So when you're talking about somebody with complex nature of the person's responses, were you open? Were you listening? Were you holding the space? Were you empathetic? Did you wonder about that? Did you wonder how it came to be, to open up that more questioning in your mind? Or did it overwhelm you? Because those complex layers of, for the participant, problem, issue, one on top of the other, life event that keeps happening, were we able to step back from that and view it from the side? So in talking about seeking out feedback, if you're working closely with someone and they would like some feedback from you, be honest, open, and try not to take a defensive side to it. This is about someone's tempting to ask for feedback, and don't forget that it doesn't always have a positive tone to it, but it's about a proactive tone. So learning from your peers and from their own experiences contributes to knowledge, which broadens your perspective of things if you take that on board. Then when you've taken that on board, how do I translate that over into my skills and use it for positive in my own work practice? But if you're giving feedback and there was something that you felt that was might be done differently, or that had a negative tone to the effect that you saw it had on a participant, say, talking about what you either noticed or what you felt it could be done in a way that I want to give you some constructive feedback here from what I saw or heard or observed, or I hear you say in a teaching way. From my perspective, I'm seeing this, or your approach was not empathetic, say. Your approach was rather clinical. How does that affect somebody? So when we say a clinical approach, you've followed all your procedures, you've done that all correctly, but was it done in an environment that was open and was holding the space and available for people to ask questions? Did people feel that they couldn't ask? I'm just putting hypotheticals out here for you as an instant. Because to give feedback that needs for the opportunity for improvement is around saying it in a professional way and not in a blaming way. And there is an art to it. So we're actually going to look at a case study here, and we're going to be talking around Joanna, and she's an NDIS support worker. And she works with Joe, who has bipolar, and he's a resident in the house that she's working at. And he often stays up late on his computer, or he's reading or chatting with friends online, and often doesn't go to bed until 3 a.m. Then he has to get up at 8 a.m. to go to his part-time job. And he comes home and is exhausted and sleeps most of the evening and often misses out on the mealtime in the house. So this is being a shared house situation where carers come in and support independent living. So some of the staff decide to try and motivate Joe to go to bed. And they have a duty of care to remind Joe of the consequences of staying up late, including the possible effects of his mental health. So before we go any further, what do you think the effects of this type of living could do to somebody who's already living with a mental illness? Lisa?
It would cause his mental stability to be very unlikely to happen. Not resting his brain, being overloaded on the internet for so many hours, and then he'd is exhausted because he's not getting enough sleep.
Builds another complexity layer up, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then that in turn affects his behavior, which would be not what he would normally be like if he was getting enough rest.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit antsy, a little bit, could be agitated, a little bit,
Yeah.
non-compliant,
Mm.
irritable, or could be just very sleepy and slow. Yeah, good point. Sarah?
Well, it says that he misses meal times and often misses out on time with the other house members. So he's only talking to virtual friends in a way, like online friends. So he's not getting, I can't get my words out tonight. Yeah, he's not getting real life friendships. So it makes it even, he's hiding behind a screen. It makes his communication, I can't get, yeah. Do you know what I mean? It makes his real life like communication harder, and then that could have an impact on his job. It doesn't say what kind of job he has, but as well as him being tired at work, he will not
And
be
those
able to.
socialization skills
That's what
are
I was
not
trying to
there.
say.
He's
Yeah.
isolating himself with his, talking behind the monitor type thing. So he's actually withdrawing in a sense from the others in the home. And they do try to have group participation in these situations too. So the story continues. So Joanna tells him that when he's ready and try to change this habit, she is happy to support him. However, she does not have the right to use practices that takes away Joe's dignity of risk in the way that it might have been done in the past. She cannot insist on or enforce a bedtime routine. She cannot remove his devices from him, and she cannot turn off access to the internet at a certain time because Joe has the ability and the right to make this decision for himself. My question here is, how do you manage your own frustrations in this scenario when what you want to implement will be for the participants' benefit and overall health, but in reality, the dignity of risk, the choice, how hard is that going to be to stand back? Lisa?
It'd be very hard. I guess the kind of the only option that she has is to keep being encouraging him to make the change and pointing out the positives for it and explaining the consequences of it and showing him examples of change and how it has positively affected people instead of just giving words of encouragement.
Yeah. Yeah. But you could understand that frustration in the sense of knowing that having more of a stable routine can certainly benefit them.
Yeah, I deal with this kind of similar situation with my 15-year-old who comes and stays with me. He goes to bed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then you make him dinner and he doesn't eat it because he's asleep, and yeah, it's very frustrating. I just try and reinforce the positive things that could come out of a change.
Yeah. Yes. And sit with that too, isn't it? To
Yeah.
sit with that, around that choice and that dignity of risk. And Sarah?
I'm not, Lisa might have said this, but my daughter came in and interrupted me. Could you provide him with some information, like see if he's willing to like watch some videos to help him understand why you're concerned, or is that appropriate?
Well, that's a good suggestion. I like this, where you're going with this, because that's about giving him some resources to understand that those types of behaviors could lead to more complexities. At least that way, Sarah, you would be doing your duty of care as still honoring his dignity of risk and his choices still to keep doing that. But you would then know that you have actually done your duty of care by informing, giving information. Remember, more knowledge, more understanding, more informed choices. So if it's that person's choice to still do what they're doing, maybe there would come a time that they would say, can you show me about that thing again? I think I've got a problem. But at least you would have given them that information. So I think
I mean,
that's a
we
good thing
don't,
to remember.
yeah, we don't, it's not made clear here why he supposes a resident, but I'm assuming he has a family, say if they have family supporting him. Suppose she could talk to them and see if they have better luck trying to not get through to him, but he might be more accepting if his family explained it all. I can't talk, explained it all to him.
That's an interesting one. And there's a big thing standing out there for me that you would have to do before you could do that.
Get his consent.
Yes. Yep. And if he says, no, I don't want you to talk to them, then you don't.
Yep.
Now, if Joe's going out to work, living in a share house, he has to be at least 15, 16 at least.
Yeah.
More than often, it could be an bit older person, but then you're not going to be referring to the family unless you have your participants' input. And that's their consent. If they don't think they've got a problem, then you can't go against what they've asked you to do.
Yeah.
Unless he's at risk of harming himself or harming others.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's causing sleep problems. But if you got really sick with that, then you might have to do something.
Yeah. Like say in a family situation, is there, I'm thinking of my boys, is there a point like when they won't come off the devices and things and having disgusting behavior to deal with, so the consequence is to turn the internet off. At what age are you allowed to stop? Like, do you have to stop doing that as far as their dignity of risk is concerned?
Dignity of risk,
Is
all
it?
right. Well, that's different in a family situation to
Yeah.
out of home care.
Okay.
And I'd say it's up to the parenting
Yeah.
within the home, the house rules, all that sort of thing. But let me just tell you that the United Nations Children's Rights does not include internet, telephone. They have a
Okay.
right to, well, if you have a look at the Declaration of Rights for Children, it's about safety, education, care, support. But when you think about our society now, we run on technology. And it's interesting, I've had a couple of chats with parents of teenage children, 12 and 14-year-olds. And the biggest issue is that we've trained them to use technology.
Yeah.
Then you get to a point where you want to take it away because of other behaviors that are happening.
Yeah.
But
I don't
then
know if
it's
you,
around education, but then, you know, depending on what situation you're living in.
I don't know if you saw Spotlight a couple of weeks ago. It was about kids being addicted to technology, and they split them into two groups, and one of the groups did a kind of softly approach and educating them, and then the other group they did, it's called it's Veteran Mentors Program. Sorry, I'm just having a look at it because
Yeah, it was like a boot camp.
yeah, it teaches them respect, resilience, and courage. And like, it's not for a punishment, but they obviously don't have their phones there, and teaches them teamwork and all of that stuff. And I'm actually trying to get my kids to do it because I think it would be awesome for them. And you can use NDIS funding. It is expensive, but luckily my boys are covered. But yeah, it
It's
sounds
about,
amazing.
look, and it's in relation to the case study, this person would be older, so taking away that dignity of risk, that choice, compared to somebody younger who has parents who help manage that risk in that sense. Similar frustrations probably felt by workers across the board around being able to sit with that decision making, because it does affect behaviours. So if you had in that situation that we've just done, I would like for you to have a discussion, just a 5-minute discussion, and then we'll go for a break. What would you have done in that situation? Just think of something different. What would you do? And where do you think your strengths and weaknesses lie? What have you learned or experienced that could help me to deal with that situation better next time? I feel I might hold some beliefs and values that are at odds with the values of that person. Do you have any ideas for how I could try to overcome these issues? These are questions to ask a mentor, a supervisor. In relation to that case scenario, I would like for you to choose one of those questions and ask your peer in the breakout room. So just say you were that worker in that case scenario. You're seeking feedback, but just on one question. Alrighty. So, Lisa, what question did you choose to ask?
The one about the beliefs and biases.
Mhm.
Where is that
And
one?
do you think
Down
Do
the
you think that
bottom.
would be difficult to ask?
You'd have to sit with yourself in the fact that you've chosen to ask that and be
That's a
ready
good
for
point.
the feedback.
That's a good point because you don't know what's coming, do you?
Yeah. You
That's a
might think
very
you've
good
done
point.
good and dandy, but the other
Yeah,
person thinks otherwise.
because you're opening up something, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're inviting something in. You're just hoping it's going to be proactive and not reactive. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually a good point. Very good point. I like that. Sarah, what question did you think you would ask?
What have you learned to experience that could help me deal with that situation better next time?
So you're bringing in that experience and Mhm. So it's almost asking for two things here in your experience, as well as what did you do, tool did you utilize there as well? Angie, what
Sorry, I had
question
an
did you ask?
emergency I had to deal with. I had
Yep.
my daughter friend came here and she had a breakdown. She and the boyfriend broke up. So
Oh,
sorry.
no,
I'm trying
no, that's
I was trying to listening, but I've recommended a few places and a few people to see. So we're getting there. I'm working already. She goes, "Oh, that's a good idea." So I've been working in the background. Sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. Um, I think one of the hardest questions to ask is where do you think my strengths and weaknesses lie? Because you're asking for positive and not so positive. How do we as a worker take that on board as well? And it's going to be how we're open to it as well, how we take that in. All righty. 8:32. Let's have about 8-minute break. Going to come back, unpack the tasks, and then we'll wrap up. Right. So let's have a look at some of the questions in task 1. So some of the questions that you might look at, they've got described the concept of confidentiality, which we've actually been talking about tonight. Identify the legislation that you must adhere to. Three standards, rules for documentation when completing records. Been talking about that tonight. Think about how you write the documentation as and what you need to have in it. what sort of information you need to have in it. Explain the concept of dignity of risk. So it might be good to use this recording tonight to go back over and do some of those questions as well. So I'm just going to bring up task 2. And I'll just share my screen again. Now, with task 2, you have a scenario. And you'll have different case studies to look at. So if we have a look at the overview first, you have case study 1, you have Amy, and Amy is a mental health support worker and completed a Cert IV and is eager to put some of her skills into practice. And she's been asked to meet Nadia, who's just applied to receive services that Amy works for. So Nadia's family came to Australia from Iran 3 years ago because they were facing political persecution. She speaks English competently, although she finds some words difficult. Amy is preparing for their first meeting and revising some of the communication skills she should use. Then you have questions to go with these scenarios. So identify 3 communication skills that Amy could use as the worker in communicating with Nadia. What's the components of body language that Amy should be aware of? So think about all those things that we talk around, not using closed body, using expressions, being, the way your body is positioned, if eye contact is appropriate or not. Think about your tone of voice. Just remember here, they've told you in the scenario, don't use idioms or slang language here. So that could be a skill to think of to not do. Then you have David. And David is a support worker in a facility for people with mental health needs. And he's been asked to look after Matthew and show him around and introduce him to some of the residents. But Matthew's not sure he's made the right choice in coming here. And he says that he noticed that the other residents are weird and they walk around by themselves and it's messy here and it smells strange. And David listens for a while and then tells Matthew that he should learn to be a bit more tolerant. He says that the facility is wonderful and has a high access rate, that he's sure Matthew will get better by participating in the programs, and that if he doesn't like the way gardens and rooms are kept, maybe you should pitch in and keep them tidy. What's the first thing we've broken here? What is he not being supportive with? What is he being supportive with? What is his duty of care here? So what feelings might lie beneath Matthew's comments about the other residents and gardens and his room? Just remember, he's not really sure about being here, so afraid, fear. What mistakes have David made? And what alternative things could David have communicated to Matthew? Then we have Denise. She has anxiety disorder and finds it difficult to leave her flat. And she finds a lot of people too hard to tolerate. And she goes to bed and sleeps a lot. And she's being supported by her GP with medication, and she sees a psychologist. So she is a computer programmer, and she's recently applied for a new job and with a big company, and she was selected for an interview. But on that day, she felt the palpitations and couldn't go. So she emailed and apologized for missing the appointment, explaining that she was ill. The company offered her an alternative interview appointment, but Denise is worried about how much she should tell the prospective employer about her illness and how she manages it, and whether this might harm her chances in getting a job. So the questions here: there is legislation against discrimination. What is that? What other relevant information should be used here to ensure she has the right to choice? And would it be lawful for an employer to discriminate on the basis of Denise's mental illness in this case? Go to Fair Work Australia and have a look. Fair Work Australia will give you a great description on what needs to be done here. Then we have case study 4, Jess, 18-year-old, attended school, just gone to university, living in, but she's living away from everybody, and she feels like she's not touching base with anyone, but she's only one of 4 girls in the first year of an engineering group. She finds it difficult to settle in. She feels homesick, not made many friends at the hall, struggling academically and finding it hard to concentrate, stays up late at night studying but can't grasp the information, trouble sleeping, losing appetite, and is experiencing anxiety attacks and periods of depression. Put yourself in the sense of a student welfare officer and think about what factors are contributing to Jess's issues here. What's a starting point for a counsellor to take in identifying, addressing Jess's issues? Now, this is about the recovery model. Make sure you go back and review that recovery model. What are you working towards for? Think of yourself, like I said, a student counsellor, student support person in a university setting. What would you be saying to Jess? How would you look at her situation from a holistic point of view? And to identify those things straight up that need work on now and things that you can work towards. I'll just go and get task 3. Right, now task 3, client reports. We have client report. You are to select 3 of the 4 case studies from task 2 and complete a client report for each client. Each section in the template below asks you to discuss different things, and you are to provide clear and detailed responses to each item. Now we have a template for you to use, and you look at the instructions for Amy, David, Denise, and Jess. And let's have a look at now. You will have, this is set up like a proper report, client name. You have your recovery orientated practice perspective, and you have questions to answer here. And when we talk about power dynamics, think about the impact that you have as the worker has over in the sense of direction, resources. Remember, we're sharing, we're not telling. So there's can be a power imbalance there. And how are we supporting self-directed recovery? What are we helping them advocate for here? Think about those words: advocacy, agency. And what strategies did you use to build up that relationship as you're working along? That is a report for each client. Same type of setup, same questions, but each scenario will have different responses here. Then in task 4, I'll just bring that up. Here we are. So in task 4 of CHCMHS002, you are doing a research project. And for this task, you are looking at the relevant mental health sector, and you're writing a report about your findings. So you can structure it like a report. You can do headings, bullet points underneath for different facts and statements. But it has to be easy to understand and read. So think about having heading, response, heading, response. If you're talking about, let me just move this over here. If you're talking about recovery, the values and principles related to recovery and recovery orientated practices, you might have recovery as a subheading, and then underneath that explaining what recovery means. And then you might have dot points that could relate to blah, blah, blah. Recovery orientated practice and holistic approaches. What does that sentence mean? Explain it. And then it could include the practices of, and then you can do dot point, person-centered practice, and bring those skills down. But do have an explanation. What does early intervention in recovery practice mean? Give an example. What is the empowerment of clients, including the concept of disempowerment? How could that happen? Give an example. Then when you're looking here, models of understanding treatment of mental illness in Australia, historical, this would be a very good part to explain the historical events in mental health. Say you're talking from the 1800s through, you could have a small paragraph and then have the events that followed were in 1810, blah, 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 in 1850, in 1895, they introduced mental asylums in Australia, which then housed many people like prisons. 1920s, talk about the events that changed. And as you're coming through, think about when the Mental Health came in, Act and changed. What changed? What changed society's view? Because remember, there was a time where we had institutions that were run like prisons and poorly staffed, understaffed, undertrained people in there who were locked away, to when we started to emerge to the recovery focused practice. What date did that change? And then how did we change our practices here in Australia? Then what is the aim? Bring it up to 2022, when the new Mental Health and Wellbeing Act came out. What is that now focusing on? So you could show through the stages what's happened. What's happening now? What's emerging from that? What's emerging from the new Mental Health Acts? Why is it important for reflective practice in mental health? Once again, go back and look at our tonight's session. Now, if you want to write more in these spaces, you can upload a separate file and put it into this area here. So in your report, if you find you have any issues with uploading it, let me know and you can send it to me. Just ask me first, and so I know it's coming. And then you can send it to me and I can upload it for you. But it should take 1 gigabyte, which is quite a bit of work here. So do it like a report. Make sure you reference at the end. Have a list of references. If you don't know how to do APA referencing style, like I've said before, make sure you have the name of the website where you are and copy the URL underneath it and just say cited on and the date you were. And that will be very close to an APA style reference list. Do it alphabetically if you can. Lisa?
Am I correct in seeing on the assessments, amount of assessments for this unit, it's 5, but there's only 4?
Yes, and there's one done on placement.
Oh, okay, I thought so. I just wanted to check,
Yeah.
that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. They when you get to your doing placement, you'll see on your Accelerate, you'll have your Cert 4, and then underneath that, it'll be like you're in 2 courses at once. You'll have your placement Cert 4 task to do as well. And that task 5 will be a part of that. So just remember, if you do start placement halfway through, you'll have extra courses, extra tasks to do alongside of your normal tasks. Some of them do come out of, like the one tonight. Others are separate because they're on-site supervised. You might be doing client reports from a centre. This is why it's good to do the client reports in your task. It's going to give you an idea of what we're looking for. when you're on placement. Sarah?
There's been two other research ones I've done. There was a link given to a reference site that you could just type in the
Yeah.
and I can't remember what that was.
I think it's called Biblix.
My bib.
Biblix. That's
Pardon,
it. That's it.
sorry, Lisa, what did you say?
MYBIB. MYBIB.
Okay.
And you just, it's really easy to use. I only
Yeah, I've
just
used it
started it.
before. Yeah. I wish I'd known about it when I was at uni. It would have made my life so much easier.
Yeah.
Look, as I say, even if you, like I say, you can do the the name of the organization. Just remember you're looking for peer-reviewed or government websites or well-known websites for information as well. Not straight off Wikipedia. Go somewhere that's more a reputable government website on historical events through mental health. You might find papers on it, systematic reviews, analysis on mental health across Australia from Banal or BMJ, all these websites that are well-known, reputable sources that have been peer-reviewed. It's not getting it from a website that doesn't even have a security lock on the URL that you're in. That's one way to tell. But if you can go to government sites and always check so if you find an organization and you're getting information from, you can actually do a search on, is this a reputable website or an organization as well? But you'll know from the quality of information if it backs it up, if it's got links to other resources there. But do have a look. The one tip is that you use Google Scholar and not just Google. So that is a tip that'll take you over from the ordinary papers to peer-reviewed papers.
Is that a different app or do
No,
you just
if you just go to Google and put in Google Scholar.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all good. You can access, I think it's the State Library as well. But think about accessing one of the government websites. I'll show you one right now. If we put government historical events, of mental health in Australia. And up will come, and you'll get different states that will come up. We've got from Queensland, the road to recovery. It goes from the asylums and institutions right through to advocacy. You can actually then access AIHW, great mental health website, Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. These are the types of the government sites that I'm talking about that have reputable information. Put in questions like, when was the first Mental Health Act in Australia? Does anybody know off by heart? I'll give you as a hint for your essay, 1962.
I was going to say 75.
Now, that's 1962. Here's a little hint on history here. There was what they used to call a lunacy act. So you can see why we have the preconceived idea that having mental illness means that you're crazy, which are these myths that are out in society. But that's the way they were treated then. It locked away into asylums. But we had what we called the Lunacy Act in 1903. And that was also relating to children in out-of-home care.
Oh,
We didn't have a change in that until 1962.
wow.
What's gone on all that time? Different things came in, but that one did not change until then.
Wow, imagine what all those poor children went through.
It's like the what they used to call workhouses in England and Scotland and Ireland. And workhouses were for the very poor people, and most of them had mental health illnesses. And they were in workhouses doing laundry and everything for bigger organizations or prisons and things like that. But they used to have to do all the work, and their living conditions were horrible. Same for asylums here in Australia. Now, this is a website for you to look at. It's called findandconnect.gov.au. And it's about how historical views, pardon me, and think about pardon me, it's got a sore throat. Think about the history of mental health stigma as well that's happened over the centuries. What was the pattern? One of the questions you could put in for a Google search is, how has mental health changed over the years in Australia? And you'll get either Melbourne, like, let's do one here. Straight up is Melbourne University. So you'll get a lot of universities or reputable websites who have done the historical research and proven those facts. Don't forget to look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. You could put in statistics for how many people were institutionalized in mental health in 1920, 1930. Yeah. I think what you'll find is some astonishing facts around what was anxiety historically called. Neurasthenia, which meant weakness of the nerves. So different things there, quite interesting to give you an insight of where we've been and where we are now in the recovery practice models now that we now use compared to medicate or lock away. Medicate and medicate heavily. So think about those things, how we've changed, how society has viewed mental health over the time. Talk about those stigmas. And then talk about the amazing change for the recovery practice. Oh, here we go. We have a great movie that Angie is supplied us with. It's called The Hours, nominated for 9 Academy Awards. Nicole Kidman as well. So it's around the 3 stages of mental health, Angie, of that somebody experiences. Was
Sorry,
it?
my hands are working again. So sometimes I have to do like this because my hand's playing up. Sorry. Yeah, so it's very boring, but when you're studying mental health, it's a really good movie to watch. I torture myself by watching it, but nominated for 9 awards, it had to be good from a mental health perspective. And she won an award because she acted amazingly in the movie. And it was about 3 different stages and 3 different women, how people saw them at the different stages. And then today I was doing the same assignment you're talking about the history. I was gobsmacked. I was blown away, especially where I come from. There's no such thing as mental health. Mind you, the country I come from is the #1 in the entire world. It's only 900,000 people in that country for the highest suicide rate for women. So when I look at that and I put it together, I was like, wow. And then watching the movie, how you gotta watch it. I really recommend it. Yeah, and how she acted amazingly and how her husband thinks she was crazy. But she's not crazy, she was a writer. But the way they view I can't give away the movie because then it won't be as good. But yeah, I thought I was torturing myself watch it, but at the end of it, it was good. Because you get a lot, because we're studying mental health from the movie in the different stages and the different ages of mental health. And then today I went and I Googled, and then World War II, World War One. We didn't even think back then about mental health. To now. Yeah. Like, how do they do it? My friend today told me how her grandma is 101. How did she live to 101 and went through World War II? Isn't that interesting to know? How did she survive? How did she manage? Interesting, I thought.
Thank you. Great resource. I'm going to have a look at it. All right. Don't forget, everybody, if you want to ask questions, you can send me an email. Also, you can book a Calendly appointment and access a trainer. There'll be more trainers coming on over the next week, coming into the organization, which is great. Please reach out if you have any other issues or want to ask questions or have any difficulties with Accelerate. Please email lso@hayderinstitute.edu.au. Have a good week, everyone. New subject next week. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.